Okay, hello and welcome. Thank you for joining us today for the NSPA webinar, Bridging the Gap, Transforming Scholar and Alumni Engagement with a Single Platform, Thought Leadership, brought to you by Hivebrite. My name is Jerry Ann Patel, and I am the Programs Coordinator here at NSPA. Next slide. A couple quick reminders before we get started. Please know that you are muted to avoid background noise. If you have any questions for the presenters, please submit them through the Q&A in your Zoom control panel. This function also allows you to upvote questions that have been submitted. If you are experiencing any technical difficulties or would like to connect with other participants, please use the chat function in your Zoom control panel as well. We are offering live captions during this meeting, so please to turn that on, please click Show Captions. If you would like to access the recording, it will be posted on the NSPA website within the next couple of days and emailed to everyone who registered. Next slide. On behalf of NSPA, I would now like to welcome and introduce today's presenters. Julia Mosconi, Assistant Director of Research and Scholar Success at Cobell Scholarship Program, and Jasmine Lim, Customer Success Manager at Hivebrite. Thank you for sharing your expertise with us today, and I will now turn the presentation over to the presenters, and I hope you enjoy today's webinar.
Thank you so much, Jerry Ann. We are so excited to be here today. Julia, thank you for being here. We're excited to also meet everyone, so please take a moment to introduce yourself, and we'd love to read more about your scholar community, its goals, and its challenges. So if you could take some time to let us know via the chat, that would be super exciting for us. Let's get this discussion started. Julia, would you please tell us the history of the Cobell Scholars Program and what does the program do today?
Yeah, thanks, Jasmine. Hi, everyone. As Jasmine said, my name is Julia Mosconi. I am the Assistant Director of Research and Scholar Success at the Cobell Scholarship Program. Before we get started, as most of you might not be aware, we are an Indigenous organization serving Indigenous students. So before we really get started, I want to start with a land acknowledgement. I recognize that we are all virtual, so the land on which you were gathered might be different than the land on which I am gathered. But as an Indigenous organization operating on the homeland of our collective ancestors, we acknowledge the presence of its original caretakers, both past and present, and thank them for allowing us to be here today. We acknowledge the shared histories of the original inhabitants of this land, a land that some tribes refer to as Turtle Island. Although cultural and social and political repairs are being made across this land, this need is ongoing and requires vigilance. So that's something that we kind of do to start off every presentation to welcome us to the space, to kind of bring us into community together. But if you go ahead to the next slide, please, Logan, we are the Cobell Scholarship Program. We were founded in part because of a woman pictured here. Her name was Eloise Cobell. In 1996, she became the lead plaintiff in a class action lawsuit known as Cobell versus Salazar. At the time, it was the largest class action lawsuit in history. So following decades of mismanagement by the Bureau of Indian Affairs, the suit demanded back payment and better accounting on behalf of individual Indian money accounts for Indian lands that are held in trust and were managed on behalf of tribal members. After about 13 years of litigation, the federal government agreed to settle for $3.4 billion, which was, of course, the largest settlement in U.S. history at the time. As part of that settlement, approved and signed into law by President Obama in 2010, $60 million of that got set into a scholarship organization, into a scholarship fund for Indigenous students, which is now where we are today. Because of the way that we were set up as a scholarship organization, we are a little bit different. But since 2015, we have funded over 4,600 scholars at a tune of nearly $40 million. Logan, if we can go ahead to the next slide real quick. Thank you. So one thing that we kind of like to talk about a little bit when we're talking to our fellow scholarship providers is we kind of realized attending NSPA since about 2017, I think we've been members, but we would attend sessions of other scholarship providers, like those who work on campus and those who look and act differently than we do. we had to start kind of figuring out where the intersectionalities would lie and how we would fit into anything that folks were talking about. Because as I mentioned, the way that everything was settled, we don't ever have to fundraise because of the endowment. We only spend the interest every year for our scholarship. So we don't have to worry about where the next grant is going to come from. We are really fortunate to get to focus exclusively on our scholars and our alumni. So one thing that our Research and Scholar Success Department created was this scholarship program rubric. We kind of sat down and thought about, well, who are we as an organization? Who are we as scholarship providers in the context of a broad scope of national scholarship providers? So we collectively, we have numerous scholarship opportunities, but the main one being academic year for both grad and undergraduate students. Award period academic year, we are non-refundable. So that means students have to reapply every year. Non-renewable. So students do have to reapply every year. We are a nonprofit and as such have a different relationship to our scholars than a for-profit scholarship program would be. We are both need and unmet need based, unmet need and merit based. So we have a couple different things that we look for when scholars and applicants start to apply or reapply. And then of course, because of the way that the settlement was issued, we fund American Indian and Alaska Native students. And then within that, of course, as we know, our students are intersectional. So they're not just American Indian and Alaska Native students, but they're much more than that. So we have that to consider as well. So we just wanted to kind of provide this context for all of you to kind of help you think about where you are in relation to what we're going to be talking about today.
Thank you so much for that introduction, Julia. That was very clear, and what an amazing scholarship program to help our communities move forward. So speaking of the scholar and alumni programming, why did you decide to bring your programming into a digital platform?
So one of the cool things about Cobell is that we are national in scope. So we get to fund so many different students from so many different places across the globe. So the only requirements that being that they are enrolled in a US federally recognized tribe and then attending a nonprofit institution. So just because they're enrolled in a tribe in, say, Oklahoma or Massachusetts doesn't mean that they can't attend schools wherever. So we even have students across the world in New Zealand and Germany and Japan. One thing that we really noticed when starting to think about what we needed in terms of a scholarship support system, more than just a check, right? We know that when Indigenous students walk onto campus, they often are the only Indigenous student on their campus, or they don't know where to look to find other Indigenous students or faculty or somebody who looks like them or has a similar experience to what they do. So we realized that when a student calls us at the scholarship office, a lot of the time, while we're a great support, they'll hang up the phone and then they'll still be alone. So one of the things we wanted to do was to really kind of broaden that sense of community that is so important and rooted in Indigenous culture and expand that into a modern age. So we realized that there was this need, especially for those folks who, this might be their first time leaving their community, going far away from home to pursue their education. So the Cobell community was an attempt to mitigate the lack of sense of belonging on campus.
I think that's a really important thing to consider and provide to your communities, and make the scholarship less transactional and more, okay, in addition to being a member of this community, in addition to being a benefit of the scholarship program, being able to increase that sense of belonging is super critical for like long-term success. So being a little bit more specific with who are the people who benefit from your scholarship and your organization, can you help us define the alumni and scholars in your organization? Like, what does that mean to be an alumni or a scholar?
Sure. So one thing we like to say in our office is that once a scholar, always a scholar. So just because they may not currently be receiving funding, not currently receiving a check, doesn't mean that they can't still receive the tools that we provide. So the way that we kind of define it is that a current scholar is someone who's receiving active funding within this academic year or this calendar year. And an alumni is anybody who has once received funding. But like I said, once a scholar, always a scholar. They will always have permanent access to any kinds of tools that we create for them, i.e. the Cobell community through Hivebrite.
Earlier, you brought up the organization rubric, programming rubric. So my question for you is, can you speak to how your scholar and alumni programming is structured within your organization?
Sure. So we, because we're such a fairly new scholarship organization, we didn't really have a lot to go off of. So it was only a couple of years ago when we really started to think about how to start engaging alumni, because as I mentioned, we have over 4,600 scholars and alumni within our community. But that is, as anybody who works with alumni knows, it can be really tricky. Just because we have 4,600 people doesn't mean we're going to have 4,600 people active and engaged on our platform. I sat in on a Hivebrite session a few weeks ago, and they brought up something called the 99-1 rule, where 90% of your population likely won't be actively engaged. They'll kind of be, for lack of a better term, like wallflowers, like flies on the wall. Folks just kind of there. There'll be 9% of folks who are what they call passive observers. So folks who might interact once in a while, but overall, they're not going to be your active engagement. And then the 1% being active engagement. So we're kind of fortunate in a way that we do have that broad scholar and alumni database group. I think to this date, we probably are pretty close to that 99-1 rule, in that we have about 400, between 400 and 500 activated users in our Cobell community. And then of course, a lot smaller than that of people who are actively engaging. But everything that we do is data informed. So we actively use the survey tools on Hivebrite, and we are constantly trying to figure out the needs of our students and of our scholar demographic to not just improve the way we work, but improve the resources that they have accessible to them. One thing that we really have to do differently is, because of the population that we work with Indigenous students, a lot of the time accessible data doesn't exist for Indigenous student demographics. So one thing that we do, because I'm in the research and scholar success department at Cobell, we've actually been partnering with other national organizations who also serve Indigenous students. And we've been collaborating on large research projects. Like we just released a year ago in August 2022, the largest college affordability study on Indigenous students to date, totaling about over 5,000 students surveyed and having conversations with them about college affordability. So that's kind of one of the things that we kind of have to learn and adapt on an ongoing basis as we find out more about the lived experiences of our students. Just like with any students, but it's extra important to make sure that we're being data informed, especially with Indigenous students right now.
Absolutely. The 99-1 rule rule is the rule that we live by here at Hivebrite. It is a constant reminder we have to present to our community builders to remind them that it's not just about, hitting that 60%, 80%, 90% activity rate, which is incredibly high for community management platforms. It's all about the quality of success that we can get with that 1%. And as you are doing, constantly collecting data, adapting, learning what it is that our community needs from you in order to be successful. And that changes over time, over short periods of time. And so that's very good advice that you've given us here, Julia. And so thank you for reminding us of that.
It's definitely been the hardest thing for us, is to remember to remain patient and persistent. Because it's really hard and frustrating when you work. We spent about 9 months rolling out our platform, and then because of how excited we were about it, it's kind of easy to assume that everybody is just going to be as excited as you were, which is not necessarily the case. So just remembering to be patient and persistent and keep finding reasons to bring people back to the platform.
Absolutely. So speaking of platform and possible challenges to running a community in a digital space, as you're bringing into your programming into a digital space, what is your advice? Well, actually, before we go to the advice, if you could speak to some of the challenges and obstacles that our audience here should be aware of when they're trying to look into coming onto a digital platform.
Sure. Like I said, the biggest thing, engagement levels, and then remembering to not get ahead of yourself. One big thing that we noticed too with our student demographic is because some folks are still living on reservations or in rural areas where there's not a lot of broadband access. So having the access to our app, our Cobell community app, has made it a lot more accessible for some folks. But even just reminding ourselves that not everybody will be as comfortable with the digital world. I know that we've kind of all been thrown into different parts of it in the last few years, but that's not to say that all of our scholars are going to be comfortable with it. We have students who are 17 years old, and we have scholars who are 65 years old. So we've got a very, very wide breadth of folks in our community. Another big thing that we've encountered that has been an obstacle for us is, as I'm sure many of the folks in the audience who work actively with alumni might also encounter, but email addresses have been a big thing for us. In one of our first set of emails that we sent out, I think we got about 300 or so bounce backs of almost exclusively .edu accounts. So that meant that somebody who signed up with us or became a scholar using their .edu account went on and graduated, and now no longer has access to that account, doesn't use it anymore, and now we don't know how to get a hold of them. And when you have 4,600 scholars and alumni, 300 is a pretty decent percentage. So we kind of don't have any answers for that. We are still kind of learning as we go. The only thing that we can really do at this point is encourage people who are signing up now, not just for the Cobell community, but for our applications in general, to use an email like a personal Gmail or whatever it is that they choose to use, making it easier to access them after they graduate.
Patience and persistence, as you said, is the key. So you've experienced some of these challenges, and for some of these challenges, you're still figuring it out. But would you have any advice for maybe some of the things that you have maybe figured out or have tried, the challenges that you've listed? If our audience is experiencing the same, how do we overcome them?
Yeah, and I would love to have to hear what anybody in the audience has to say about any of this, because like I said, we are a brand new organization who's learning, experiencing the growing pains as we go through. I think we just hit a staff of 12. So for about 6.5 years, we were functioning with about 9 to 10 person staff for, as I said, nearly $40 million in scholarships and 4,600 scholars and alumni. So that's one of the other reasons that we looked to a digital platform, was because we knew that it wasn't going to be feasible to interact with our scholars and alumni in a one-on-one capacity.
Absolutely.
So that's one of the reasons that we started pulling into the community, right? Because we knew that we couldn't do that. So by creating this home away from home on a digital platform, and providing them tools and resources, like we've outlined four now different programs to entice people to keep coming back. The first one being our Cobell Connect, which is exclusively for networking and engaging virtually, and even possibly someday engaging in person. Our Cobell Skills is for upskilling. So every month we've got a different topic. This month in November, we are currently talking about professional communications, what it means to answer the phone, to have a professional phone call, what it means to send a responsible and professional email, so on and so forth. Like next month is going to be resume basics. And all of these tips and tricks we've consulted out to folks who know what they're talking about, because we recognize our own limits, right? So we know that we're scholarship providers and we're researchers, but we are definitely not somebody who should be talking about professional development in that sense. So we bring in folks who are able to talk about that. And in that same breath, our third program is called our Cobell Leadership Development Program. And we're really excited to have offered this one. We're partnering with the Center for Expanding Leadership and Opportunity, our folks who use what they call the Index. It's a leadership program in which students can take personal assessments and kind of gauge where they're at with different types of leadership levels. And then we've also incorporated this partnership to have different videos in which students can watch the video after and before taking this assessment to kind of help them think about it in a different way, so that they can go on and start to adapt their leadership styles based on whichever category they were taking it on. And then our fourth program is our Cobell Awards and Celebrations program, which is actually just launched this week, which we are collecting nominations for, to kind of help celebrate everyone, because we know how hard it is to be in school and to also be an active community member and a good relative, and so on and so forth. The list is ongoing, but we want to make sure that they know that we see them. So by having this awards and celebrations tab, it could be as simple as you graduated magna cum laude from school, or it could be as big as you got a job in the White House, or something like that. Just finding little ways to show them that we are there and that we care.
I think it's really important for us to celebrate the thought process and intention that you have brought into your programming here, understanding what it is exactly that you want to solve with your community using a digital platform, what it is that your community members are going to tick, how will they respond to you, right? What is it that's going to make them come back? Being able to identify that, and then designing programs that will bring them back into the platform. I think that is, not there is no magic recipe, but it's definitely one of the recipes that we can definitely employ as we're thinking about running our communities on a digital space.
Right. And like I said before, all of this has come through because of what students, scholars, alumni, partners have told us, either through one of our surveys or by word of mouth. So everything that we're doing is, like you said, is with such intention, and it is so data informed, that it's creating a really solid foundation for what we hope to be a very robust alumni system at some point.
Really awesome factors that I hope our audience take away from our call today. So let's talk a little bit more about strategies and some of the platform features that you were looking for your strategy. What are the most important platform features to you?
So like I said, we have a very small team, small but mighty team of staff members who are doing amazing work, but because of the breadth of our scholarship, that leaves it leaves less of our staff members to be able to engage with our demographic, with our students. So having the ability to talk to scholars and alumni and bring in external partners to talk to each other almost cuts out the middleman, if you will, and allows us to just kind of host, almost like with NSPA hosting this webinar. We are hosting a space for them to engage each other. I think is the best way to talk about that. Thinking through how we started engaging with Hivebrite. I remember we had a mighty but extensive Excel document with all 4,500 plus student names and all of their information. And it just got to be a lot to try to keep up with, and then monitoring who had graduated, who is still in school, who transitioned from vocational to undergrad, who transitioned from undergraduate to graduate, like, you know, a lot of these different issues. So it was really great to have the integration parts of Hivebrite where we could import that Excel document into the Hivebrite system. And then we almost immediately were able to engage people right in our Cobell community. It was very important to us to be able to have that ease of access and a secure system for all of that data as well. The other big allure, like I said, was the mobile app, just purely because of accessibility. And that it's very easy to use and easy to update. And the analytics on the back end really, again, data informed. They help us figure out where our gaps are, what's working, what's not working, so on and so forth. And then the last thing I'd want to touch on is just like I said, we were such a brand new organization, so we didn't have a legacy database. We had to start from scratch, and we needed a way to collect raw data in an engaging way from all of our students across the globe.
Thank you for listing that out. Some of the things I heard were managing a large community and a large funded program with a small team, being able to scale your programming, scale your services as a small team to a large pool of community members. So thank you so much for listing that out. With these features in mind, let's help out our audience. You know, how can organizations ensure that they're selecting the right platform for what they need with their community?
That's a great question. I guess the thing for us was that this wasn't our first attempt at creating an online community. So there might be trial and error. There's only one way to kind of find out. I do recognize that we are privileged in a way where we don't have to actively fundraise. So we have a little bit more leeway when it comes to this kind of stuff. But know that we did spend about 9 months prepping our system, prepping the Cobell community with all of that intention. And we did our research beforehand to be prepared for what we did end up creating. We asked a lot of questions. I think in those 9 months that we spent working on the system, I think about 4 of those were engaged with our CSMs, customer success managers, with our onboarding teams, with the sales reps who first had those conversations with us, like, what does this platform even look like? What is Hivebrite? So it was just a lot of questions, a lot of trial and error and transparency. It was very helpful to have transparency from Hivebrite's team.
Absolutely. If there's anything I can attest to as a customer success manager is we love customers who understand their issues and their problems and having a very specific list of questions that they have asked in order to get here and start integrating themselves into the program. And so definitely don't be afraid to ask those questions and make sure that you are buying a model, a product that fits your needs as a customer. So thank you so much for sharing that. I do have our final question here. I do like asking my customers as I speak to them to ensure that we're aligned on our goals. How can we make sure that both sides of the platform are being successful in helping our customers with the mission, right? Are you meeting your organizational goals, and are we as a product and service doing what we're able to do to help you push the needle forward? So my question is, how can organizations measure success and the impact of integrating their alumni and scholar programming when using a platform? How do you measure success, Julia?
Well, that's a great question. And it's kind of a loaded question, right? So how I measure success will be different than how my director measures success, will be different than how my newly appointed Scholar Success Associate measures it. But essentially, when it all comes down to it, we go by quality over quantity. So if we have our 4,600 students, scholars, alumni, and then only 10% are passive engagement, and we have our, 9%, and we have our 1% here. If only one of those 1% attend one of our live Q&As and get something productive out of that Q&A, we consider that success. So it really comes down to what each individual scholar and alum is getting out of this engagement. Is it a one-on-one conversation that they've had with each other? Is it a new resource that they've found through our site? Is it something that they learned about themselves through our new leadership development program? It all comes down to how they feel and what they're getting out of it. But like I also said, it's all a work in progress. We're so new and we're learning as we go. And so we are always all ears when it comes to this kind of continuous learning, data-informed continual learning that we do in this community, not just our Cobell community, but here at the NSPA and Hivebrite communities as well.
That's awesome. I think it's important to know and accept that measuring success isn't always about the quantitative. It can very much be about the qualitative. And if we can get success with your 1%, 2% of your community members and know that they're going to be high quality of being able to solve the community members' issue or being able to take them from one stage to the next stage, advance their career, advance their status in life, I think that is definitely worth celebrating and tabulating, and also to be flexible in what success means for your organization at that certain time. Measures of success and goals can always change. It's important that we phase it out, start small. My common advice is slow and steady wins the race. So those are some of the things I would share with our audience members here. Well, excellent. We do have plenty of time to take some questions from our audience. So let's check out some of our Q&A here. If we have any open questions or any questions posted from our community members. Let's answer one of these questions. Julia, what are, let's see, we have Kim who has raised a hand, and I'm wondering how we can make that happen. As we figure out how to get you involved, Kim, I do have a question about the onboarding process in our queue. Let's talk about how you onboard your users into the platform, Julia. So when you add people into your platform, like at what point did you decide they get to join? Is it that like as soon as they receive an award, as soon as you've identified that they are a scholar recipient, you immediately add them into the platform, or is there a little bit of a process? How does one become a member of your community?
That's a great question. So, like I mentioned, we do have the 4,600 plus from our current list, as it were. So they all got imported right off the bat. But since then, as we know, communities will continue to expand, and we have the request to join button on our site. So folks who are brand new scholars, they are alumni who kind of slip through our cracks, they are friends of our community who want to engage. So they can request to join, and then they have to indicate through which group they'd like to join. And that will kind of help regulate how much access they have. And then quarterly is when we do a data import. So we work with our operations team and we request all of the new scholars who had not been previously awarded. And then we'll add them into the system through the imports. And it's pretty painless, actually, and Hivebrite makes it very easy. And kind of one of the cool things too is if Jasmine were to start to be a scholar from 2017 and we have a different email on our file from Jasmine, and then she requests with her updated one separately from the system, we can merge both of Jasmine's accounts, and it makes it really, really helpful to kind of streamline some of those processes.
Awesome. We do have a question from Kim. Can you have multiple classes? For example, alumni is a class and donor another class. So I think the question means like, can you group different people? Can you label different types of perhaps roles or clusters of joiners in the platform? Kim, if I'm interpreting your question correctly, I hope I am. So Kim says yes. So
okay, great.
Awesome. So I think, yeah, do you organize your community members in different categories? So let's talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, that's a great question. So we actually do. We have what we call we've got our 6 major communities, right? We've got our scholars, we've got our alumni, we've got our friends of Cobell, which is basically anybody who has an interest in wanting to support Cobell scholars. We have our leadership, and then we used to have prospective scholars, but we did take that one off because we were going to do a slight switch in how we're doing things. So we were just down to the main 5. Within each of those 5 communities, as we call them, we have what we call our networks. And within each network, so for example, our scholars network, we have our vocational scholars, we've got our undergraduate scholars, we've got our graduate scholars, we've got our research fellows, we've got our first and second year network, which is designated exclusively for students in their first and second years of college, because as I mentioned before, those are the 2 hardest years for students, specifically Indigenous students, to adjust to campus life. We even got opportunities in the future to create a network for STEM students. So there's a lot of opportunities to kind of really create those niche networks and groups, as you will.
I'd love to stay on the topic of user onboarding, Julia. Once a community member has joined, what are some of the onboarding things you might have done or are thinking about doing to kind of bring and welcome the community member? What is their experience like the first month of joining?
Sure. So like I said, we're very new to this. We actually just launched in August. So this is only month 3 for us. But we've got staff members who are quick to just write a message on their Julia Mosconi has joined your community post and say, hey, Julia, welcome. Thanks so much for joining. We're also currently doing a incentive program, which I don't foresee lasting terribly long, but we came into some tablets. And so what we've been doing is sending out a free tablet to one random engaged user every week. So we've been doing what we're calling our 10 weeks of giveaways. So every week we select somebody at random who's been engaging in one of our forums. Just, little incentives to try to get people really active and engaged. In addition to that, we have all 4 of the programs. Those are just kind of actively existing in the in our each network. So we've kind of actually got our programmed networks. So students and scholars can access all of that information just by going to community.cobellscholar.org and going into the Cobell Skills Network. And then within each of those within each of the media centers within there, that's where we house all of the content. So for November, you'd see November professional communication on demand video. So one thing that we've done with our skills section, our skills program, is every month we have a on-demand video in which students can learn on their own pace. This is the asynchronous section of each program. And then later in the month, we have a live Q&A, which is our synchronous portion to that. So we were trying to balance the fact that most folks using the platform have very busy lives. They're students, they're working a full-time job, they're a family member, etc. So having that respect for them needing their own timeline, but then also trying to recognize that while this is a virtual program, we do want to try to engage them in person, albeit remote.
So you're running programs, Julia, with your community to get them to engage and obviously benefit from the content that you want discussed or content that you want them to consume. Can you speak a little bit more to how you're running these programs? So you have a team of 14. Give us some insight into, how much work goes into running these programs just with a digital program. Like perhaps some insight into how much planning you're doing, what the behind the scenes looks like.
Yeah, for sure. So like I said, we kind of did a lot of planning on the front end of our rollout. So a lot of that 9 months spent rolling out our platform or creating the platform was also creating some of this content. And like I said, we decided early on that we weren't the right people to be creating the content. So we quickly found consultants within our networks who were perfect for that. So we partner with MindCore Collaborative, which is an organization who's been helping our skills section, our Cobell Skills program. And then, of course, like I said, the Center for Expanding Leadership and Opportunity, who does our leadership development program. Apart from that, it's myself, my director, and then one of our new staff members who started about a month and a half ago. So he is still knee deep in all of this information. He's been kind of doing a lot of self-guided learning through all of the video recording that we took from when Al, our onboard specialist, was helping us. It was a lot. It was a lot of preemptive work, but and like I said, it's going to be ongoing, right? So it's going to be something that we will find out from our surveys. We will find out from word of mouth, from people just saying things on our discussion forums. We'll take that and we'll adapt that into future programming.
Awesome. Yeah, the survey piece is, I think, super important to collecting information and adapting to that. We've got another Q&A popped up here, so I'm going to read a comment and question from Betsy Vegso. We have similar hopes for our online community, so it's good to hear the slow and steady message. Awesome. A comment that Betsy has heard is not wanting to join or sign in to yet another platform, right? So competing with all the other social medias. Some have said they prefer to connect on peers and systems where they already have a presence, the big companies such as Facebook and LinkedIn. What are your thoughts on how to overcome that type of initial resistance, Hivebrite or community platform versus social media platforms? Are you also seeing peer-to-peer connections in your community? And if those peer-to-peer connections aren't happening, what helps you facilitate that? So 2 questions.
Right, those are great questions. Overcoming initial resistance. I think the biggest thing is for us, it's just trying to figure out how we can be set apart from those. So adding those programs to us was a very important distinction. LinkedIn is, for basic networking and maybe for job hunting. Facebook is purely for social engagement, but we wanted to make ours set apart from something like that. We wanted it to be a combination of Facebook, a combination of LinkedIn, and then we wanted it to be its own space in which our scholars could feel included and seen and engaged. Because like I said, when we hang up the phone with them, if they give us a call, we know they're still likely alone on their campus. So providing them that sense of belonging and sense of visibility is really important for us. As for the peer-to-peer connections, we're still growing. I think mostly it's folks just kind of engaging in a prompt. So in our forums, we'll put a question like, what's your best tip for completing a scholarship application? And then you'll see folks kind of engage in that discussion forum, and they'll say, oh, Jasmine, that was a great point. Like, you're totally right about that. I've never thought about it that way. We've also had some folks utilize the traveling spot, like the traveling notification on the live feed saying, hey, I'm going to this conference. Is anybody else attending? I'm not entirely sure how fruitful that's been, but I have seen it, and I'm really hoping that as other folks start to see its use, that they'll feel more comfortable starting to do the same.
I often like to answer this question in a form of like, imagine you're hosting a party and you invited all your friends, but everyone's shy. So as a host, what are you going to do to facilitate introductions? You grab their hands, you pull them together and say, don't be shy. Here's Jasmine, here's Julia. You both like community management. Let's talk about that, right? Yeah. So you're tagging your folks, you're bringing them into a common space, and you're just sometimes forcing that conversation to happen. You are helping facilitate that by actively actually bringing them together instead of waiting for them to talk to each other. And often sometimes as community builders, we do have to market, tell a story, market and showcase the relationships that have formed, and like publish that as a news. Jasmine and Julia, they met on our platform. Now they're working on this amazing project together in their community. So the little things like that, I think, can really go a long way to help your audience know that that is the way that it's acceptable to behave when you're on a digital platform. It's okay to say hello. It's okay to make that connection because that's what we want. That's why we're here, and to exemplify that. So thank you so much, Julia. I hope that was helpful, Betsy. We're going to ask a final question before we wrap up our webinar today. Julia, what are you most looking forward to with running your community?
Oh my goodness. Probably just to see the engagements happen. Like I said, that quality over quantity. That one person who runs into me at a conference and says, "Oh my gosh, this community has been so helpful. I've learned so much about myself. I've learned so much about XYZ." Because ultimately it's providing the tools for folks that might not have had it otherwise. And at minimum, that's a lot.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Julia. It was so great talking to you today.
Yeah, thanks, Jasmine. Thanks, everyone.
Right. Thank you, Julia and Jasmine, for being with us today and sharing your expertise and experience. And as a reminder, this recording will be posted on the NSPA website within the next couple of days, as well as emailed to everyone who registered. I hope you take a couple minutes after this to complete the survey that will pop up after you exit. I would also like to invite you to the next NSPA program, the 3 E's of Selection Committee's Thought Leadership webinar from ISTS next Thursday on November 16th. This concludes the NSPA webinar today, and thank you for joining us, and have the great rest of your day. Thank you.